So we are already at the bottom of the hour. So let's go ahead and introduce our speaker, Nicole Martinez-LeGrand. She is coming to us from the Indiana Historical Society today. She has been working with the Latino, Hispanic, and Asian collections, working with oral history interviews and genealogical research into the ethnic communities and adding manuscripts, books, photos, and other paper-based items to this rich collection. She is doing amazing things to broaden the reach of the Indiana Historical Society and grow that collection. She has been able to present this into exhibits in 2018 and 2019, and she has also written a couple of books, which I hope she will bring up at least at the very end and show us today, so you guys know which books that she has authored. And we are so excited to have her here today talking about Mexican genealogy in the Midwest. Nicole, if you would like to go ahead and share your screen and unmute, we will get started.
All right, so today we're going to talk about Latino Hispanic history and genealogy in Northwest Indiana. Well, not Northwest Indiana, but more so the Midwest. So a little bit about where I work and where I am. The Indiana Historical Society is located in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we were established in 1830. So a large part of our collection is the old Northwest Territory and Indiana statehood history. So paper-based ephemera. Now we are moving more into digital collections, so we have a lot of stuff online, and then actually have digital-born items as well. We are not the state archives, but we are one of many archival holding institutions here in the city of Indianapolis, and we are located on the downtown museum campus on the canal. We are actually, this picture here is looking across the street at Ohio Street. And our archive and library is free to the public. So if you come here, we actually validate your parking. So we're really, really free. So what are the learning objectives? So you're going to learn, we're going to start off with the context of Latino Hispanic history in the United States and the Midwest. I think this is very important to understand before we go diving into records, because as you dive into records and you're trying to piece together your family history, you're going to have a lot of questions, as what is I call the big why. And so we're basically going to talk about the early Midwest Mexican diaspora and then understanding immigration factors. And also we're going to learn how to pinpoint arrival in the United States and then how to search some documents in both the United States and Mexico. So Latinos in the United States, they are the most mature population in the United States is Mexican. So when you think of Mexican history in the United States, it's more about initially about borders crossing Mexicans than Mexicans actually crossing borders. And I will dig into that. So we are trying to frame Latino and Hispanic history, Mexican history in the United States. As you can see here from this map, roughly a third of the United States was indigenous and Spanish speaking. It was the Empire of Mexico up until 1848. The border of Indiana was only a couple hundred miles from Mexico. And so, so you do see smaller populations of people who were born in Mexico if you're looking at census records beginning in the late 1800s. So, and presently those states are Arizona, California, part of Colorado, part of Kansas, part of Nevada, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, and Utah. And so I like to kind of do kind of a timeline. So from conquistadors to pilgrims, it's 101 years in terms of the existence of Latin America. But if you want to do Columbus to pilgrims, it's I think roughly around 120 plus years. So thinking about how many generations of people have lived in Latin America and in Mexico, and then putting it in context of US history is very interesting. But one of the main challenges is that we have been Latinos, I'm Mexican American, so when I say we, that's what I mean, have faced statistic invisibility until 1980. So that wasn't really until we really tried to get some real specific numbers. 1970, the census asked some specific questions, but there was a lot of misunderstanding, but it wasn't until 1980 when we started to get those numbers. So 1848 to 1980, it's a pretty wide gap. And you think of all the people that were uncounted, counted, it's just really interesting. So when people always ask me, why did Latinos or Mexicans come to Indiana? That's no two immigration stories are the same. And so I boil it down to push and pull factors. So, and this can be applied to any other ethnic population. So, what is pushing people out of their countries? It could be political or civil conflict, economic instability, discrimination, whether that's religious or cultural, and then what's pulling people? So work, whether it is recruited or self-seeking, education, family, or love. And what we're going to look at a little bit today are the sticking factors. So there's three: push, pull, and stick. So stick is really what kept people in certain parts of the state, certain neighborhoods, and things like that. But immigration law really affected these factors as well. So kind of and we'll talk about that throughout the presentation, really kind of the overriding factor in these factors. So what did the early community look like? So as I said before, the border of Mexico was really only a couple hundred miles from the state of Indiana, who earned its statehood in 1816. And so here's a look at who was here. So the Mexican consulate was Indiana's first Mexican consulate that began in 1907 and existed up until 1927. Russell B. Harrison, the son of Benjamin Harrison, and the grandson of William Henry Harrison, I think I got that right, he comes from a great political lineage, was the first vice consul of Mexico to Indiana. And so his office was here in Indianapolis. He was a local attorney. So his law office in the Newton and Claypool building on the corner of Ohio and Delaware Street in downtown Indianapolis was served as the first consul location. Also within that time period, I think it was maybe 1917, Mr. Harrison was also the vice consul to Portugal at the same time, ending his term in 1927. So here are some announcements from the Indianapolis Star, and also his acceptance letter to Porfirio Diaz, accepting his appointment. And not until recently, the Mexican consulate itself, who opened its doors here in Indianapolis, I think in 2002, was largely unaware of this history. In the 1910s, most of the Mexicans that you would see here were from affluent families. So Notre Dame, the Midwest, or Indiana's premier Catholic university, drew a lot of these students to Indiana, as well as Indiana University with our medical and dental schools here in Indianapolis, and as well as Purdue, and those with agricultural background. So here you see a news article on the left from 1910 documenting the first Cinco de Mayo celebration in the state. And so they list a number of students and giving these speeches talking about Cinco de Mayo, and giving speeches. I really would love to see a copy of these speeches, because I wanted to know what they would think of Cinco de Mayo 1962. What were those essays about? And then also here is another article from 1916 where you have this splashy headline called 100 Mexicans Live in Indianapolis. And so when I was doing this kind of research, I think this was the first newspaper article I found about the early Mexican community in Indianapolis, and started to dig a little bit further. I love doing newspaper research and seeing what I can find and understanding those perspectives. And newspaper research is also great for you as well, to kind of understand the conditions in which some of your family members, the communities in which they live. So the onset of the diaspora. So the diaspora didn't really truly begin yet. We have, again, like you can see, a sprinkling of some folks, but it wasn't really until the conditions were set for the Immigration Act of 1917. So with this act, it's called the Asiatic Barred Zone Act. This expanded previous exclusions on the Chinese and other Japanese and other Asian populations, select Asian populations, into the United States, but also added a head tax and literacy test. And Mexicans were exempt from both. And so here is an alien tax receipt form from 1927 from Amelia I can't remember her married name, but she married a man from Chicago who was living in Mexico by the last name of Clarkson. And so here is her head tax where I think she paid what, $8. And so and that came from her daughter Rosemary. So in 1918, Mexicans were called in the name of war relief. So this would be the first of two times the United States would tap on Mexico and its laborers to work into the United States. So this is World War I. And so just basically a departmental order authorized 30,000 Mexican nationals to work in agriculture, railroads, and other defense-related employment, all in the name of war relief. So you see a lot of people, so a lot of Mexicans were originally, Mexican nationals were working in like Texas and, basically the first map that I had just showed what was once Mexico. And so they were so close to the border that they would, naturally return and Mexico became an easy, readily available supply of laborers. Because of this, the state of Texas actually put out some pretty interesting laws to help stymie this because there were so many foreign laborers, Mexican nationals, going into Texas and then hopping a train, and then they're on their way to the Midwest. And so, and there was, with this department order, there were some changes to that law. So labor agents would have labor agencies in Texas because at this time it was illegal to recruit foreign labor in the foreign country. And so people would just go to these temp agencies or these labor agencies and then pick up a contract. And again, they would travel to, places like Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, and as far east as Pennsylvania. And so they are solely responsible for the Midwestern Mexican diaspora. And these laws that I had talked about, the Immigrant Agency Acts happened at the late 1920s, where they actually put bonds on workers and really steep financial fines on labor agents. So it became fairly expensive to be in Texas to recruit for non-Texas jobs. And it could easily end up into the thousands. So in Indiana, so this is where we kind of start to see some clues that, they are coming in mass to Indiana. So, this is a grocer, C.E. Larson, in East Chicago, Indiana, advertising Mexican chili beans. And then also here we have a news article of Mexican editors visiting plants in Lake County, specifically Indiana Harbor and Gary. Indiana Harbor and East Chicago are twin cities, but they are essentially they are the same area. And so Mexican editors were traveling to different areas in the United States, reporting back to its readership in Mexico, talking about the conditions in which a lot of early Mexican colonies have lived and thrived. So we also have the Great Steel Strike. So on Monday, September 22nd, 1919, the steel strike comes to Northwest Indiana. And so as you can see, thousands of people are walking out at a Gary steel mill. And a lot of Mexicans were already working in Indiana at this time, but it wasn't until this time where people started to do more recruiting. There is a narrative that Mexicans were primarily the reason why they're here in Northwest Indiana as strike breakers, but as I've presented evidence before, we had been here long before that. And so and there were laws that were placed that we were wanted. They wanted us here. And so even prior before the steel strike. So that's really a narrative that I'd like to promote and for people more to lean on going forward as we talk about this history, especially in the Northwest part of the state. So here are some maps from 1928 illustrating where these people lived. So there was a author, Paul S. Taylor, who wrote a series of multi-volume report called Mexican Labor in the United States. They are fabulous resources. They include quotes, anonymized quotes from actual workers, employers, labor agents. So you can really get this beautiful story, not this, well, this is a really clear story of what conditions were like. And especially if you have a family member who lived in Gary, East Chicago, or any of these 5 Mexican colonies, they could have been interviewing, your great grandfather or your great great grandfather. And there are most state libraries have this actually on Hathi Trust, HATHAI Trust. I think it's one word .org or .com. You can actually find this entire report, this specific volume, digitized and online and free to use. Looking at colony number 4, these are the 5 established Mexican colonies in the Calumet region. And so these are density maps. And so here, what I have circled here on the map on the right is the Block and Pensy neighborhood, bordered by Block and Pennsylvania Avenue. So, and these little dots here represent the number of school children that live in those areas. And this report also details which schools they are attending. So this is Lake Michigan. So the early Mexican colony, and this is a very dense color, literally formed outside of gate number 1 of Inland Steel Company. So this area has largely been demolished by urban revitalization, but if you are ever driving on the toll road or on Klein Avenue, making your way out to Chicago, you are actually driving over the early Mexican colony of Indiana, the birthplace, the epicenter of this population. So this population was largely upended in the 1930s by the Mexican repatriation movement. So I went across the state interviewing individuals who were alive during this time. Most of them were young children. And then they would talk about certain family members leaving by train back to Mexico. And when I would ask if, was it because of the repatriation, they said no. They said, no, 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 they wanted to go back. It was, they wanted to go back. And so there was an era, there was some shame around. And I did some investigation, and I actually wrote a 2-part blog for the Indiana Historical Society talking about why it looks so different here in Indiana and different areas. So you see words like deported, but you see things like relief work or relief program. And so it was never publicly called Mexican repatriation. And so it was the Great Depression. And so it's kind of like last to be hired, first to be fired. But you also had people here who were, struggling with unemployment, and also not being able to be on social relief rolls because a lot of them were mixed status. Some of their children were born in Indiana or born elsewhere in the United States and were not eligible for those resources. And so it was seen and advertised as a large act of charity to provide a reduced fare rate train tickets back to Mexico, and then working with the Mexican consulate or the Mexican government actually as well to help bring their brethren home. So you have the Mexican Revolution from 1910 and 1920 that pushed people out also of the area. And so they were trying to bring their citizens back saying, hey, there's land, there's jobs, we're economically stable, you want to come back. And so, and they were, it was called, I want to say it was like Back to the Land movement. And so that was happening. And so on top of, anti-immigrant sentiment and laws that are largely influenced by eugenics, is just a whole big recipe for setting up this relief program. And so if you're ever interested in learning a little bit more about it, go to the Indiana Historical Society's website and look at their blog, where I have a 2-part blog series fully detailing this. So now that we have a very baseline understanding of Mexican, the Midwestern Mexican diaspora, we're going to look at how to look at records. So in terms of genealogy services, these are the ones that I use. I use Ancestry.com and I use Family Search. Now for ease and ability, I do use Ancestry a lot. I have a personal subscription. So I have the World Explorer subscription where I get Mexico is a focus country, and so I get to see Mexican records. So that means there will be interspersed records from different other Latin American countries, but they're not. It's just a couple here and there, and it's really hard to go step by step to go back to finding those specific records. So stateside, with both of these services, you can find marriage, divorce records, birth, death, census records. I forgot to update this because now you can find the 1950 census. So 1920, 1930, and 1950. Those are the primary census I use to research this time period. Border crossing cards, we'll look at that. Passenger list and manifest, city directories, which I also love just as almost as much as I love the census, and then newspapers. So, different kind of notices, obituaries, and the like. So when you are looking at records, so everybody knows about the naming convention of Mexicans. You include your paternal and maternal name, paternal and maternal name. And sometimes when they come to the United States, they'll drop one of those two names. But it's also great because it kind of gives you a clue as to making your steps back to finding out your maternal and paternal lines. So here are some examples of a single unmarried man or woman, what their name would look like, and then a married woman. And these are my family names. And so I'm using the examples that I know best. So how to pinpoint US arrival. So I largely use border crossing cards. So those are through the US Department of Labor Immigration Service. I look at passenger lists and manifests, and I also look at the US Census. So these are the three elements that I use to triangulate to get a date. So when I was interviewing folks, and then I would do a genealogical workup on them before we would conduct an audio recorded oral history. For a lot of people, they didn't know the exact date of when their family arrived to the United States. And some of them were, infants or very young children. And it's not like you have a date written on your calendar, pinned up to a cork board or on a magnet in your on your refrigerator, like this is the day that we came. So people having this kind of information was very powerful for them, and it gave them something else to celebrate. So here is an example of a border crossing card. Very rarely will you find a photo. If you do, that's great. This one is a little bit different. So if you look at the date, this is in hang on, where's the date? Let me move this I've got something blocking it. Let's see, 1919, okay. So this is Ignacio Maravilla. And so I interviewed Fred Maravilla, who was born in March of 1918. And so here, he didn't know that his dad had traveled to Arizona to work to picking cotton right after he was born. And so you look at the employer, Arizona Cotton Growers Association. So this is furthering the understanding of that department, the department order recruiting Mexican labor. So just like in the Bracero program, large growers associations or large farms were able to get government assistance or work with the government to recruit workers. So likely Ignacio over here was able to have a contract upon arrival. So you look at the spelling of his name, it's spelled with a Y, also spelled with an I. So you have to kind of figure for all of those misspellings. So you received the vocabulary list in that handout. I gave all these different examples of how names can be spelled, not spelled, in even in records in Mexico to help you to be 100% sure this is who you are researching. And so here's an example of other border crossing cards. This is what I found in the border crossing collection. This is actually my great grandmother. And so this is her alien identification card. And this is something that she had before she earned her citizenship. And so it gives us a detail. So here's the most interesting. Let's see if I don't know if it's on the next slide. Oh, no. Here we go. Hers is very detailed, but the method in which she arrived is right here. And that word is canoe. So this is was just real interesting. And so this was in 1922. This is right before before the border was um, heavily employed. I don't know, but the border was a little bit loose at this time, a little bit fluid. So not many people cross at actual like crossing border stations, like at Eagle Pass, Laredo, or other places in Texas and out west. So she must have been at an in between point, in which she had to cross via canoe. Um, Here's another example of a border crossing. So this is like the short form. This is where you're going to get very basic information. So this is for Fred Maravilla, who I interviewed. So we looked at his dad, Ignacio, and so I was able to pinpoint for him, this is the day that you entered into the United States. This is something else called the long form. Now, this is all in Ancestry. So the long form you can find through the card catalog feature. If you go, and search and look at the card catalog, you can look for long form and short form. This is also Ignacio Maravilla in 1922. So we see his arrival date is May 19, 1922. He's accompanied by his wife and son. And so it lists their names. So we just saw Fred's short form, time spent in the United States, destination, location, place of birth, and then how much money he had on hand. I think that's always an interesting factor. And I always go through the inflation calculator to see how much money that would be today. Also, this is what, basic list and or just manifests look like. They can be super detailed, or they can just give you very basic information. So for plane, ship, or train, so Mexico, Puerto Rico, and then people arriving from Central and South America. So now we're going to look at how to pinpoint location. A lot of things that I like to use is the U.S. City Directory, which is also through Ancestry. Sometimes you can find city directories on archive.org, another open source free research that's also listed on the handout, and then census records. So we are looking, so what I love about census city directories is that they're like mini census records. You get the location, you also get their occupation, as well as who else is living in the house. So these were done year by year. People knocking on doors trying to gather some information. So not always are you going to have sequential years. Sometimes there's a paper shortage or something or other. So you won't always get year by year, but these are also a great place to kind of start to get, and then compare them to census records, because you're going to have that 10-year gap to find out where people, how do they get to point A to point B? And so these are really great kind of like, searching between the lines. So city directories, like I said before. So this is for a family that I was researching. So Porfirio Rico, his wife, Bonifacia. And so they worked selling soft drinks. The family said that this was had to do with liquor. This is the Prohibition era. And so they probably listed soft drinks as a ruse. So, and you have the thing called R same, which means resident same. So both Bonifacia and Porfirio are living at the same destination. Also, census records. This is also where you're going to find a lot of great information. You have the name of the individual, and so I think, let me see, whose family am I looking up? My own family. And so just looking at all kinds of great information. The house number, which is also beneficial, so you can compare that to, if you're trying to, it doesn't matter which way you start. If you're looking at census record, you can find them there. They can compare to city directories to see how long they lived at that address. The name of the street, place of abode. And a lot of the questions that they ask change year from year. Sometimes you'll find like point of arrival, asking what year they got married, how long they've been married, and then just very, occupation, or some other very streamlined questions. So each census is different every 10 years. And so looking at the place of birth. So sometimes if people are born here, so when I talk about statistic and visibility, this is what I mean. So here you have person, the father, person who's born in Indiana, their father and mother are Romanian by birth. if they were Mexican, that person who was born in Indiana would have been classified as white prior to 1980. So they had no national origin to attach themselves to. But if you're looking in between the lines, you would be able to see that, right? And then citizenship, AL means alien, and A means naturalized. And so it talks about what process they are in receiving their papers. So let's look at a case study, having trouble to find your parents. So example, you're having trouble locating parents. People are always looking for parents. So this is the best example that I can use. So I'm going to look at census records, marriage certificates, death certificates, Social Security death, and then the Social Security death index. We'll talk about the SS5 form. So I am looking for this is my great-grandfather's death certificate, Jose Reyes. And so I was trying to find his mother. And as you can see, his father is Evaristo Reyes, but his mother is listed as Pablo Aguilar, or Aquilar, there's a Q in there. So it's not even Aguilar, it's Aquilar. So I know that's obviously misspelled in a wide variety of ways, but here's what I'm going to do. This is my journey of how I was able to confirm that name. So is it Paula? Is it Paula? Is it Aquilar? Is it Aguilar? What is it? So misspellings are common. The great thing about Ancestry is that these genealogy websites figure out this in the search function. So, all right, so I'm going to go back to his Jose Reyes' long form border crossing pattern because it's going to tell me his place of birth. So we see that he was born in the state of Jalisco and he was born in Lagos de Moreno. So I'm going to go and look at records in that state. But before we jump into Mexico, I'm going to look at the Social Security Application and Claims Index. And so, oops, let me scroll back. And so, I was able to find some, death dates and see what that information looks like. And then also in the notes, it also lists, especially for women, if their names have changed or there were any kind of alternate spellings of their names once they became a citizen. So Jose could have easily became Joe upon becoming a citizen. And so that would be listed in the note section. And this is on Ancestry. So, and then the SS5 form. So if you would like to see the full Social Security card application, this is the Social Security application, very basic information. So you're not going to get everything on there, but for privacy reasons, but you can fill out a SS5 form. And you can see their full listing. So, their name, their age of their last birthday, date, place of birth, father and mother, gender, date, date signed of the applicant, addresses. And so if you are able to, and have the time to do that, you can fill out a form. You can go to the Social Security Administration website or Roots Web. There's a form letter on Roots Web just showing you how to properly ask for this information. And you'll be able to see what rules. I think it has to be so many generations. It can't be, somebody has to be like, it has to be like a direct line. So they're not just going to get that information out. And before it used to cost, I haven't looked at the updated cost, but at one time it was $27 and it could take up to 6 months to process. This is pre-COVID. So it could take up longer and it could be a little bit more expensive. But if this is something that you are wanting to find out, definitely use this option as well. So we're going to look at searching in Mexico. So, okay, we are still looking for Jose Reyes' mother. So foreign documents often require the same background information about parents. I honestly find that it's easier to do genealogy in Mexico than it is the United States because a lot of these records list both maternal and paternal grandparents, especially on the baptism, birth, sometimes date, death, and marriage records. And there are also some limited census records. The 1930 Mexican census is on there, and that's also very interesting as well. And if you cannot read the form, usually you can find a blank form so you can see what the columns are and what they're asking for. Here's a little trick. So if you have a subscription to Ancestry.com, you can go on AncestryMexico.mx. And so you change, it'll be a completely different website. And so, when we're in the US side, we're looking at names and this is what they're asking. Now we know about the naming convention. It's a little different in Mexico than it is in the United States. So, is one part of their last name their middle name? When you're trying to search in the United States, it gets a little tricky. But then when you do it in Mexico, this is what it looks like. So I had this page translated into English. So you can put in put in the names that you do know, and then you're able to get a more interesting list. You'll mostly almost practically get an identical um, list of hits, but this kind of helps refine it for you as well. So I'm still looking for Jose Reyes's mother. And so here's our 1905 marriage registration date. So we know, this record is able to tell us that he was from the area of Santa Cruz, in the municipality of Lagos de Moreno in Jalisco, Mexico, and then parent information. Here it is. So he is the legitimate son of Evaristo Reyes and Paula, not Paula, Paula Aguilar. So there is a list in the definition of the handout. So hijo, son, legitimate son, or natural son. There's a big difference. So this means that his parents were married. If it's hijo natural, that means his parents were not married. And there was a lot less stigma of being born out of wedlock than it was in Mexico than it was in the United States. For example, the national poet of Mexico, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, was born out of wedlock. But again, they didn't prevent her from becoming a nun and, being widely respected as Mexico's national poet. So familysearch.com, it's a little bit of a different kind of search module. They just recently digitized a large collection of, I think, Mexican baptism records. Baptism records are also great because you can also pinpoint birth date, because people were baptized days, maybe if not a day, right after they were born. And so you can see that information as well. So let's see, if you're on the Family Search website, let me back up. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So you go to search, and then you can click on a different country. And then when you're like in North America or the Western Hemisphere, these are some of the areas that they have listed. So let's click on Mexico, and they have it boiled down by state, which is great. But do know that states' borders changes, and a lot of names change after the Mexican Revolution. So prior to 1848, when third of Mexico became the United States, there were different states' names, or some of these states were elongated. So kind of figure that into your research as well. And then, Mexico Online Records, and there's all these different things over here on the right-hand side, so you can look at, what's available. So these may not always be complete records. You may not find exactly what you're looking for, but it's really good to look at these different type of records to be familiar with these type of records. We live in an age of rapid digitization, where a lot of things are being digitized all the time. So don't feel like if you didn't find it today that your search is completely over. You will be able to, at someday, somebody's going to scan something and post it, and it'll be available. So also another great thing that you can find in Family Search is Antonio Garcia Cuba's Gazetteer. So if you're able to get really, really deep back into your family history, he was a geographer, and he was there from 1888 to 1891. And this is basically, this Gazetteer is a dictionary of places describing towns, villages, parishes, municipalities, states, populations, rivers, mountains, other great geographical features. So this is also really great if your family grew up and lived in a hacienda. Hacienda records are hard to find. Haciendas, it's kind of like a feudal system. Before 1821, there were Spain gave land grants to people to populate Mexico, and haciendas were either mining, agricultural, or farming, and then Spain would get proceeds from that. And so a lot of people lived generations and died on these haciendas. And so After Mexico earned its independence from Spain, this system still was around. And then the Mexican Revolution happened in 1910 and 1920, and poof, they were gone. So you can find some census records. I think they're called padrones, and a lot of universities, especially University of Arizona, has a lot of these. They're working on digitizing these padron records. I think there are some padron records on Family Search. I haven't done that kind of deep back research in a while, but it's good to know that it's there. And actually, I have a copy of this gazetteer, just a reprint, and so it was interesting to find somebody's family mentioned here. And so it is online. It's digitized through the University of Mexico City. And so if you don't speak Spanish and you're not familiar with old Spanish, you can translate the page. And so as you can see, there's different volumes. And so here's what it looks like when it's translated. This is what it looks like. And they also sell reprints of this online. Also, if you are, if you're looking at a record and you're tired of, and this is if you're just a brain is completely tired of trying to translate and some words you're not getting. I use the Google Translate on my phone just to kind of I just want to skim through something, or I'm not 100% sure of what they were saying. So you go to the camera feature and these little boxes will pop up against the words. You drag your finger around there to reveal what it says. And now, as you can see, this isn't the greatest of translations, but if there are a lot of words that you are not familiar with, this is really great, kind of like a stopgap feature or something quickly in your hand, in your bag, in your purse, if you're on site somewhere or online, do this kind of quick research. Other Latin American countries, you can look for, stateside, look for ship and flight manifests. Cindy's List is a great resource for genealogy, Ancestry, World Travelers, subscription only. Ancestry did up its prices this year, so I would check if you are looking at local libraries to see if they have a subscription and if that would include that. And then also there is a great genealogist out west by the name of Colleen Green. That's her website. She offers a lot of great tips and tricks. And then, all right, and then what is this? So searching in other Latin American countries like the Caribbean. Puerto Rico is a US territory, so that's going to be included in your basic Ancestry subscription. So here are some, examples of what is available out there. Baptism records from 1590 to 1928. That's a really great swap, but you are going to be, it's not like index like Ancestry, you're going to be able to find a hit. You'll have to go through it like an old school microfilm. But if that's the thrill of the hunt in genealogy, is going through all of these records. This is what Cindy's List looks like, and other different kind of, the category index. And then that's it. But before we get to questions, I wanted to let you know, I'm gonna turn my camera so you can see me. Hi. And then here is just released one of 2 books that I published. This is Hoosier Latinos, A Century of Struggle, Service, and Success. It goes through a very detailed history, looking at the population in the United States as a whole, immigration law, movements, things that really affected our community, complete with some photos that have never been seen. These are personal photos that I've collected along my journeys, collecting for the Indiana Historical Society, things that have never been seen publicly. Also, another book that was just released, Asian American Voices in Indiana, and so goes over the collecting initiative. I was doing both at the same time, collecting that for the Indiana Historical Society. So I think there's lots of questions. So where to begin?
Yes. So thank you very much for highlighting those books. I think it's very good to bring that up. And somebody even noted that they got the first book for Christmas, which is amazing.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, it was just released, I think, right at the end of October. So, it takes a while for things to catch on. And I'm really glad that somebody bought that for you. Oh, Who Lived on Pennsy from Steve Corona. Oh, I think I know your brother, Father Corona. He was the priest at my local high school. And so I do have some photos of the Corona family. Steve, I'm going to put my email. I'll share it with you if you want to send me an email and I can show you what I have. And Martinez-LeGrand at indianahistory.org. So please send me an email. Let's see.
All
What
right, it
other
looks,
questions?
yeah, I was going to say, did you see the question about how does one access ancestry.mx?
Yeah, you just literally just, ancestry.com. It's just ancestry.mx. You just change that last part in your browser and it'll automatically translate. So you'll end up on that landing page.
That's easy.
Mm-hmm.
I will also put a call out that we do have Ancestry World here at the
Yes.
Genealogy Center. So if you are local or making a trip here, you will have full access to all of the Ancestry records. So I will just put that little plug out there.
Not many people spring for that extra subscription, so I would definitely make a trip to Fort Wayne and check that out.
It's worth the time.
Mhm. Lake County, East Chicago, yes. Oh, Veronica, I could tell you a lot about East Chicago. And so a lot of, if you go to the Indiana Historical Society blog, if I talk about the early Mexican community, a lot of it is about East Chicago, Indiana Harbor, because that's where the epicenter was. That's where it all started. In terms of community health, there is a section in the book called Los Barrios of Indiana. So looking at Indianapolis and the Block and Pittsy neighborhood, talking a little bit more in depth about that in the book. So, but I'd be happy to share any kind of research or chat with you, Veronica, if you just want to send me an email if you have any kind of questions.
There aren't many questions, but I did want to again point out that the handout is absolutely fantastic. There's vocabulary words, there's all sorts of pieces of information, websites, etc. Oh, nope, there is a question now.
Yeah, adoption. Was okay, so where was she? So adoption's a little bit tricky. I'm not well versed in Mexico, but I know like in the United States it's a little different. And then in terms of like, was it through an agency? Was it through like how did that happen? Oh, Torreon. Okay, I do know, I am aware of that area. It's oh, did somebody, I think you reached out to me on something asking me questions about that. Adoption records are very hard unless you have some sort of like a family name. There's also DNA. DNA can be also very helpful. I didn't go through that today in terms of matches. There are people, there's like a DNA group, I think on Facebook where, some people help you kind of finalize, what is it? Do something DNA detectives, I believe. It's a private group. And so Aiden, I would check that out. So yeah, Aiden actually works here at the Indiana Historical Society. So we're gonna chat later. Oh yes, Search Squad Facebook groups. Thank you, Sarah.
I was going to say, Sarah is actually our DNA in-house expert here. So she would also be a really good person to reach out to. So feel free to shoot us an email as well and address it to Sarah. So that's genealogy if you want to go the DNA route at acpl.
It's a whole other level. So
yeah, there's lots of things going on.
Yes.
And I was also, I was just thinking about it with an adoption in Mexico, would it be potentially more church-based? Would it be with a
yeah, I think so. It would be depending on how recent the adoption happened. Like I don't know what their laws are in terms of like open and closed adoptions. There's a lot of other kind of complicated and then the term adoption. So somebody knows that they were adopted. What does that mean? Was it through a formal agency? Was that from like word of mouth, family to family? But in terms of I think DNA would be a good option to
oh yeah, definitely.
to try to narrow it down, at least to kind of figure out more about if you can't find those records, that's another, there's always a back door somewhere.
as a librarian, of course, I'm trying to search and try to find adoption records as we're talking, and they're very difficult for Mexico. So I can see where that would be an issue.
The name, oh, Nancy, the first book, Hoosier Latinos, A Century of Struggle, Service, and Success. And you can, they're right now only available through our website at the Indiana Historical Society. So if you go to the shop feature, it's there. And then the second one, Asian American Voices in Indiana, also available through our website. So that's where, so if you, and it's through the IHS Press.
Okay, I just put that link for the shop
Thank you.
into the chat. I was gonna say, I know that we have those books on our list to order, so.
Mhm. They were just released. So yeah, any other questions?
But I don't see any more questions in here. So I'm gonna go ahead and say you have answered most of their questions, and they're probably sitting back and just trying to figure out all the things they need to do next. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for attending today. Thank you, Nicole, for a wonderful program. It was fascinating per usual, and I'm so pleased you were able to join us and we were all able to learn something new.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and hope to see you at our Thursday program. Have a good day.
See ya.